Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tearing into a comprehensive study you sent us, focused on a community really vital to the heart of India, the scheduled tribes of Madhya Pradesh.
That's right. This deep dive is all about unpacking who these groups are, their incredible cultural tapestry, the, very real challenges they navigate, their history of powerful resistance, and the complex picture of policies meant to support them.
Think of this as getting the essential insights from the source material, giving you a shortcut to understanding a population that's not only the largest tribal group in India, but also holds significant ecological and political sway in Madhya Pradesh. Our mission is to cut through the detail and connect the dots on this fascinating, multifaceted topic.
Absolutely. We'll explore their sheer numbers, where they live, delve into the distinct traditions of some major groups, look at the, stark realities in health and education, revisit the history of uprising against oppression, and then examine the well-intentioned policies and the critical gaps in their implementation.
Okay, let's unpack this study and dive into the scheduled tribes of Madhya Pradesh.
Let's start with the sheer scale, because the study reveals a fundamental insight right away. Madhya Pradesh is home to the largest scheduled tribe population in India.
Largest. Okay, let's really lean into that. What kind of numbers are we talking about, according to your source?
Well, the 2011 census figures, which are, a key part of this study, put the number at over 15.3 million individuals. That's a substantial 21.1% of Madhya Pradesh's total population. But look at this, it also represents 13.57% of all tribal people across India. This isn't a small, localized group. They are a significant demographic force both within the state and nationally.
Wow. More than 1 in 5 people in Madhya Pradesh are from a scheduled tribe, and they make up a serious chunk of the total tribal population across the entire country. That immediately tells you they are central to the state's identity and future?
Precisely. And their importance goes way beyond just the numbers. The study highlights their crucial role as custodians of biodiversity. We learn that approximately 60% of India's forest cover is located within tribal districts, many of which are right there in Madhya Pradesh. Their traditional knowledge and practices are absolutely vital for conservation efforts.
Right, so they are key to the ecological balance. And politically. Your source mentions considerable political influence.
Yes, that large population translates directly into a significant voting bloc. Their increasing presence in governance structures, and yes, even figures like India's first tribal president, reflect their growing importance in the national political landscape.
Okay, so we've got the overall picture. Huge population numbers, vital ecological guardians, and growing political muscle. How many different recognized groups make up this population?
The study identifies 46 recognized tribes within Madhya Pradesh. Crucially, it also highlights 3 particularly vulnerable tribal groups, or PVTGs. These are subgroups identified by very specific acute criteria like stagnant or declining populations and extremely low literacy.
Yeah.
We'll touch on some of the major groups and these PVTGs as we go because they face specific heightened challenges.
All right, let's get into the demographics from that 2011 census data. Where are these 15 million plus individuals predominantly living?
This is where the rural picture is stark and impactful. Over 93% of the tribal population lives in rural areas. Compare that to the state's overall urbanization level, which is closer to 28%.
That's a massive difference. What's the insight here? What does that rural concentration tell us about the challenges they might face?
It tells us a lot. This deep concentration in rural, often remote areas profoundly impacts everything from their access to basic services like healthcare and education to the types of development initiatives that can actually reach them effectively. Policies and support need to be rooted in the realities of rural infrastructure and resource management, not just, general state planning.
That makes complete sense. Access must be a huge barrier. What about education outcomes given that rural concentration?
Literacy rates are a critical concern the study emphasizes. The literacy rate for scheduled tribes in Madhya Pradesh was a very low 51% back in 2011, significantly trailing the state average of 69.32%.
51%. That's a really significant gap compared to the state average.
It is, and the source specifically highlights that while there's a gender gap in literacy across the state, it is particularly substantial and, damaging among tribal women. Low literacy, especially for women, creates a vicious cycle. It affects health outcomes, limits access to vital welfare schemes, and severely hinders economic mobility and empowerment.
So it perpetuates cycles of poverty and vulnerability. Okay, what about population growth? Is the tribal population growing slower, faster, or about the same as the state overall?
The study shows it's actually growing faster. The decadal growth rate for STs between 2001 and 2011 was 25.2%,
Okay.
notably higher than the state's overall rate of 20.3% during that same period.
Faster growth, overwhelmingly in rural areas, often dependent on traditional land and forest practices. Here's where it gets really interesting. This must put immense pressure on already stretched resources and existing ways of life.
It absolutely does. This trend underscores the urgent need for proactive planning. We're talking about promoting livelihood diversification beyond just resource dependence, implementing sustainable agricultural practices, and crucially, ensuring the securing and protection of tribal land rights through proper legislation and its effective implementation.
Okay, we've got the overall numbers, the rural trend, the literacy challenge, and the growth rate. Who are the major groups making up this 15 million plus population?
Your source identifies the Bhil as the largest group, making up 37.7% of the ST population. The Gons are very close behind at 35.6%. The Kol are the third largest. Other significant tribes mentioned in the study include the Korku, Sahariya, and Baiga.
And the PVTGs you mentioned earlier, the particularly vulnerable ones.
Yes, those are the Baiga, Sahariya, and Maria. The study emphasizes that these groups are the most marginalized, identified by criteria that point to extreme vulnerability. Pre-agricultural technology, populations that are stagnant or declining, extremely low literacy rates even compared to other tribes, and significant economic backwardness. They represent the most acute challenges within this larger picture.
Understanding where these groups are concentrated geographically must be key to effective support. Are they spread evenly across the state?
Not at all, and understanding the distribution is absolutely critical for targeted interventions. The study points out that some districts have over 50% tribal population, places like Mandla, Dar, Dindori, Barwani, Habua, and Alirajpur. Habua and Alirajpur are particularly notable, with tribal populations nearing 90%.
Wow, nearly 90%.
And specific tribes often have their own distinct concentrations. For example, the Bhil are predominantly in the western part, districts like Dar, Alirajpur, and Shabua. The Gond, interestingly, are the most widely distributed, found from the Vindhya and Satpura ranges right down to the Narmada Valley, and are reported to be present in all districts of Madhya Pradesh.
So Gonds are everywhere, but others are very localized.
Exactly. The Kol are largely in the eastern districts like Rewa, Siti, and Jabalpur. The Korku are more central and southern, in areas like Hoshangabad, Batul, and Chhindwara. The Sahariya are primarily in the northwestern districts Guna, Shivpuri, Shahpur. The Baiga are found in eastern and central regions like Mandla and Dindori, with a specific, well-known concentration in the Baiga Chowk area, a cluster of 52 villages. And the Bariya are primarily in Jabalpur and Chhindwara, with a major concentration in the isolated Patakat Valley, where they make up almost 90% of the population. The geography really isn't just a map, it shapes the specific needs and cultural expressions of each community.
That transition feels right. Let's move from the numbers and locations to the incredible vibrancy the study describes. What does the source tell us about their cultural heritage?
Well, their culture is incredibly rich and deeply connected to nature and their unique social structures. The study highlights what's called a syncretic identity.
Syncretic.
Yeah, meaning they often blend their indigenous practices and beliefs with elements of Hinduism, but they absolutely maintain distinct traditions that are their own.
And these customs are shaped by their environment.
Yes, historically tied to hunting and gathering, though there's been a significant shift over time. Agriculture and forest produce remain absolutely central to their lives and cultural practices.
I found the mention of youth houses in the source fascinating. Can you explain what those are?
Ah, yes. What's fascinating here is the institution of traditional youth houses like the Gotu or Rangbang. These are not just dormitories, they are communal living spaces for unmarried teenagers. The study describes them as absolutely vital centers for social learning, where tribal history, traditions, and values are transmitted culturally. They even play a role in mate selection, emphasizing the importance of communal life and the structured passing down of knowledge across generations.
That's a remarkable way to preserve culture and structure society. Let's look at some of the major tribes we mentioned and pull out specific cultural elements the study highlights.
Absolutely. The source gives us vivid details. The Bhil, the largest group, primarily speak Hindi dialects. Traditionally, they combined hunting and gathering with farming. Their diet reflects their environment: maize, onion, garlic, chili, plus forest foods and hunted animals. They're famously associated with bows and arrows. Mahua liquor is also noted as culturally significant.
And their art is internationally recognized, right? Pithora painting.
Yes, Pithora painting is their renowned art form. The study describes it as characterized by the vibrant use of multicolored dots, depicting daily life, beliefs, and mythology, with horses being a frequent motif. The source specifically points to figures like Puri Bai, who is groundbreaking in bringing Pithora from mud walls to paper and canvas, earning a prestigious Padma Shri Award, and also Pema Fatya.
What about their festivals?
They celebrate major Hindu festivals, yes, but they also have unique ones like Akatij and Nawai, and perhaps most famously, Pagoria. This is a huge festival celebrated around Holi, known for its unique custom where marriages can occur through elopement during the festivities. Their religion is deeply animistic, worshipping a wide range of local deities connected to nature: serpent gods, gods of villages, crops, livestock, the lion, and the buffalo. Tattooing is also traditional for women. Socially, the village panchayat often facilitates marriages by mutual consent, with the custom of dappa, or bride price, being significant. Traditional dress is also distinct.
Okay, fascinating. What about the Gond?
Then we have the Gond, who primarily speak Gondi, though many use Chhattisgarhi. Their economy is based on subsistence, agriculture, hunting, fishing, and gathering. The source notes they have specialized sub-branches within the community like the Rajgond, who are farmers, the Agaryas, who are traditional iron smelters, and the Parthan, who serve as singers and bards, preserving their oral traditions.
Their art style is quite distinct from the Bhil's Pithora, correct?
It is. Gond art is known for its vibrant colors, intricate patterns, and depictions of nature and folklore. The study highlights Jangar Singh Shaim as a pivotal figure, credited with founding a new school of art called Jangar Kalam, focusing on deities and animals. Their festivals are also a blend of Hindu and indigenous rituals, with the Karma festival being very significant. Their religion, too, is deeply rooted in animism, worshipping nature spirits. They have a strong oral tradition and a deep love for dance and music, particularly the Karma, Sela, and Rina dances. Their society is traditionally clan-based, and their homes are typically simple and traditional.
And the Baiga, one of the PVTGs.
Moving to one of the PVTGs, the Baiga. They have a belief that they are descendants of Dravid and are often referred to as sorcerer medicine men in some contexts. They speak Baigani alongside Hindi. Their traditional livelihood is profoundly tied to the forest. They are described as passionate woodsmen and hunters.
The study mentioned a specific agricultural practice they follow tied to their beliefs.
That's right. A key cultural practice is Biwar, a form of shifting cultivation. What's unique is their reverence for Dharti Mata, or Mother Earth, which leads them to not plow the land. Their diet reflects their forest dependency: coarse grains, forest foods, and hunted animals. Maho liquor is mentioned as being very popular. For Baiga women, tattooing, performed by traditional artists called Gadnaharan, is highly significant, not just as adornment, but for its cultural meaning. Singing and dancing, especially the Karma dance, are fundamental to their cultural life. They worship folk deities like the Sal tree, revered as Buddhadev, along with Kauradev and Julhadev. The study notes subcastes exist and live-in relationships are common. Their traditional dress is unique, although saris are becoming popular.
Okay, let's talk about the Korku.
The Korku tribe speaks a Kalarian language. Their livelihoods blend agriculture, animal husbandry, hunting, and fishing. Their staple diet is coarse grains, but interestingly, the source notes that some in Batul district have adopted cultivating crops like potatoes and coffee.
Potatoes and coffee, really?
Yeah, bit of diversification there. Their festivals show a mix of influence, including major Hindu festivals like Dussehra, Diwali, and Holi, alongside traditional observances such as Karam and Pola, where they sing Chalari songs. They worship deities like Lord Shiva, Dogan Devta, Meghnad, Murdadev, and the moon. The study highlights a unique and significant ritual, building memorial pillars for the deceased, which they call Mundadev.
Memorial pillars, that's quite distinct.
It is. Society is described as male-dominated, with large joint families being common. Their traditional governing body is the Korku Panchayat, headed by a patel, which resolves disputes. Tattooing is also practiced. The source notes they have 4 main subsects and gotras named after natural objects.
Got it. And the Kol, mentioned as one of the most ancient.
Next, the Kol, noted as one of the most ancient tribes, with mentions even found in texts like the Rig Veda and Puranas. Historically, they were known for their involvement in construction, including palaces and forts. Now, their primary livelihoods are cultivation and labor, and they continue to depend on forest products. They observe major Hindu festivals, but the study also mentions the ancient agricultural Jawara festival held twice a year. This festival involves feasting, singing, and dancing, and interestingly, spirit possession is believed to occur during these times. They worship Hindu deities such as Shatalamai and Shardamai.
Spear possession, wow.
Kol society has adopted many Hindu rituals but retains older traditions, like protecting mothers and children from evil spirits. Funeral rites include both burial and cremation. A traditional greeting involves an embrace. Their villages are typically found in forest clearings with a central shrine. Kol women are noted for their love of ornaments.
Okay, and finally the Sahariya, another PVTG.
Finally, another PVTG, the Sahariya, found in the northwestern districts. Their history is sometimes traced back to the figure of Shabari from the epic Ramayana. Traditionally, they practice shifting cultivation, hunting, and gathering, sometimes living a nomadic life. However, the study points out that due to forest decline and lack of other job opportunities, many have now become daily wage laborers, leading to significant seasonal migration, which can disrupt their traditional life. Their beliefs blend animism and Hinduism, worshipping folk deities like Virtaja and Thakar Baba. They hold a belief that spirits of the dead can cause illness.
Mm-hmm.
The study notes that Sahariya communities live in distinct clusters called Saharanas, located outside the main villages, often in housing that's described as prehistoric in style. Small joint families are common. They have a traditional governing council headed by a patel to resolve disputes within the Saharana, and a chukla panchayat for inter-village issues. While child marriage is not favored, widow remarriage is permitted. Men and women have traditional dress, and the sources make a specific note about addiction to local wine being an issue.
That's an incredible depth of cultural detail the study provides for each of these groups. It really paints a picture of diverse and vibrant traditions. But this contrasts sharply with the next section, which details their socioeconomic conditions and challenges.
It's a tough picture, yes. Despite this rich cultural heritage, the socioeconomic reality for many scheduled tribes in Madhya Pradesh is deeply challenging. The study paints a concerning picture of profound issues that significantly impede their development and well-being.
The source specifically highlights the health situation, which sounds quite severe.
It truly does. Madhya Pradesh has faced some of the highest mortality rates among larger states. The study points out that in 2018, it had the highest rates for neonatal, infant, and under 5 mortality, and the third highest maternal mortality ratio. And while national rates showed improvement by 2021, MP's rates remained significantly higher, and critically, their rate of reduction was slower than the national average. This isn't just high numbers, it's a situation where the gap isn't closing fast enough.
So the health crisis persists. What specific health issues are prevalent according to the study?
High rates of malnutrition are widespread, alongside prevalence of malaria, tuberculosis, anemia, stunting, and wasting. Non-communicable diseases like hypertension and diabetes are also emerging as issues. STDs and waterborne diseases are common, often linked to poor sanitation. The study names specific regional concerns like sickle cell anemia, fluorosis in Manla, goiter in Baiga areas, and alarmingly high rates of iron deficiency anemia in tribal adolescent girls, nearly 94%.
94%, that number is staggering.
It is, and the barriers to healthcare access are a major part of the problem. Primary health centers are often underfunded, understaffed, and physically far from remote villages, leading to very low rates of institutional deliveries. The study also notes a pervasive mistrust that exists between tribal communities and non-tribal service providers, which hinders care. Sanitation is extremely poor in some areas, with access as low as 21%. Even some traditional beliefs, like the Korku idea that eating well during pregnancy makes childbirth difficult, contribute to poor health outcomes.
It sounds like a complex web of interconnected issues creating a health crisis. Let's move to education. We touched on low literacy earlier.
We did, citing the 51% overall ST literacy rate from 2011. The study provides more granular detail that is even more concerning. Over 70% illiteracy in some coal villages, only 38.8% literacy among the Korku, and a strikingly low 19% literacy for the Sahariya tribe.
19% literacy for an entire recognized community. That's incredibly low and points to a fundamental systemic failure. What does the study identify as the core reasons for this?
The study details several layers of barriers. It's partly about infrastructure, a lack of schools, resources, and qualified teachers, compounded by the sheer distance many children have to travel in rural areas. But there's also a significant cultural conflict. Curricula are often not relevant to tribal life and knowledge, leading to high dropout rates. Economic barriers are huge. Poverty forces children into labor, especially girls. There's often a lack of awareness about the importance of education, and deeply ingrained social issues like child marriage disproportionately affect girls, pulling them out of school.
Right.
The critical insight here is how this persistent literacy gap, especially for women, severely limits their ability to access vital health information, benefit from government schemes designed to help them, and gain the empowerment needed to break cycles of poverty.
It truly highlights how these challenges are linked. What about livelihoods and economic issues?
Well, their traditional reliance on agriculture and forest produce makes them inherently vulnerable to external shocks like climate change and environmental degradation.
And the study emphasizes land alienation and displacement as a major ongoing issue.
Yes, this is critical. Tribal communities are frequently displaced, losing their ancestral lands and livelihoods due to industrial projects, mining, or conservation efforts. The study points out that the very legislation designed to protect these rights, the Forest Rights Act, FRA, is facing inadequate implementation. Nationally, only about 50% of claims are approved. Even more concerning, the study highlights zero recognition of community forest resource rights in Madhya Pradesh, leaving many landless and vulnerable. Recent changes to forest conservation rules are also noted as raising concerns about potentially easing the path for displacement.
So the legal protections aren't being fully translated into reality.
Exactly. This, combined with the decline in traditional occupations due to deforestation, restrictions, and market exploitation, forces many tribal individuals into precarious daily wage labor. This often necessitates seasonal migration, causing socioeconomic instability and sometimes even overshadowing their distinct cultural identity. The Sahariya, as the study notes, are particularly vulnerable to debt traps and bonded labor under these circumstances. Even well-intentioned government schemes like MGNRE-GA often face implementation gaps, limiting their intended benefit.
You mentioned the PVTGs earlier as facing particularly acute challenges. How do the Baiga, and Sahariya specifically fit into this broader picture of socioeconomic issues?
They represent the most severe end of these challenges. The study details how they struggle with extremely low literacy rates. We saw 19% for Sahariya, severe malnutrition, alarmingly high mortality rates, and profoundly limited access to both health and education services.
Just the basics are lacking.
Precisely. For the Baiga, deforestation forces them to migrate, directly impacting their health and traditional lifestyle. The Baiga face extreme isolation and limited access, putting their cultural identity at risk. The Sahariya and districts like Shifapur face severe malnutrition, very poor housing, often just one-room huts, the low literacy we mentioned, 19%, chronically low income, less than Rs. 2,500 a month is cited, and widespread chronic energy deficiency. The study also notes they face discrimination and violations of their constitutional rights to education and employment. Their identity is often tragically overshadowed by the necessity of forced migration simply to find labor. These groups highlight the compounded nature of the problem. It's not just physical access to services, but the reluctance of service providers to work in remote areas, a deep-seated mistrust stemming from past experiences, and development schemes that often completely ignore traditional practices or clash with their cultural identity.
This picture of challenges is certainly tough to hear. But the study doesn't just focus on the problems. It also highlights a powerful history of resilience and resistance. Tribal communities haven't passively accepted exploitation. They have fought back.
Absolutely. Their history is marked by resistance, particularly during the colonial period, as they pushed back against new administrative systems, the rampant land alienation we just discussed, forced labor, and discriminatory policies. It's important to note the deeply harmful impact of actions like the British classifying some tribes, including the Bhils, as criminal tribes, and using acts like the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871 as a punitive measure specifically against those who rebelled. This further fueled resistance.
That must have intensified the conflict. What were some of the key rebellions the study details?
Your source details several significant uprisings that demonstrate this spirit. The Bhil revolts, starting as early as 1818, were a series of uprisings against interference by the East India Company, their loss of forest rights, and exploitation. These weren't a single event, but resurfaced multiple times, including a protest in 1881 against census classification, alcohol prohibition, and new administrative structures. The 1917 revolt even saw Jurasius joining them against petty taxes and forced labor. These were crucial in exposing mistreatment and fostering political consciousness.
Right.
Then there was the Coal Uprising of 1831-1832. While centered elsewhere, it had a definite impact on coals in MP. It was primarily a response to economic exploitation brought on by British land and administrative systems. The study notes that while brutally suppressed, it did eventually lead to some British policy reforms regarding land ownership for coals. The Gond revolts played a role in the major 1857 rebellion against British rule. The Gondwana kingdom was active here. The source highlights Shankar Shah, a Gond ruler who led an uprising in Jabalpur. He and his son Raghunath Shah became powerful symbols when they were executed by cannon for their patriotic poetry urging resistance.
Executed by cannon. That's brutal.
Indeed. And linked to this, Rani Avantibai Lodi, the queen of Ramgarh who supported Shankar Shah, she bravely revolted against the British, employing guerrilla warfare tactics, and famously chose suicide over surrender, solidifying her as a symbol of unwavering resistance.
These are truly incredible stories of courage and defiance woven into the fabric of India's struggle for freedom. Who were some of the prominent leaders who emerged from these movements?
The study highlights several figures whose legacies endure. Tantia Bhil, active between 1878 and 1889. He earned the moniker Indian Robin Hood because he was known for plundering British wealth and distributing it to the poor. He was renowned for his agility and mastery of guerrilla warfare. Captured by treachery and executed in 1889, his legacy as a messiah figure who fought for the poor persists.
The Indian Robin Hood.
Yes. Bhima Nayak from Barwani district was a key Bhil leader in the 1857 rebellion in the Naimar region. He reportedly met with Tantia Tope, a major figure in the wider revolt, and confronted British forces, earning the name Nemed's Robin Hood. He was eventually exiled and hanged in 1876. He is honored today by a government scheme and memorial.
Right.
Ganjan Singh Korku led the jungle satyagraha in Betul district, specifically protesting against restrictive forest laws imposed by the British. He mobilized his community, effectively integrating these local grievances over forest rights into the broader Indian independence struggle. Badal Boy, a revolutionary from Chhindwara, was called the Gandhi of Chhindwara for his commitment to nonviolent resistance. He organized large gatherings and inspired the Koitur people, which is the term the Gond use for themselves. A state tribal museum is rightly honored by being named after him.
Gandhi of Chhindwara. That's quite a title.
It is. Birsa Munda, while primarily associated with the state of Jharkhand, his powerful Ulgulan movement against British policies and exploitation had influence that reached into regions like Madhya Pradesh. He was far more than just a freedom fighter. He was a significant social reformer, promoting education and unity among his people, revered as Dharti Abba, or Father of the Earth. There's even a Birsa Munda chair at the Indira Gandhi National Tribal University in Amarkantak, MP.
Right.
And of course, Shankar Shah and Raghunath Shah, whose execution in 1857 became such a potent symbol, and Rani Durgavati, a Chandela princess who bravely ruled the Gond kingdom, defending it against the Mughals in 1564 and choosing suicide over surrender. The University of Jabalpur is named in her honor.
Incredible figures.
These leaders and movements collectively highlight the deep-seated grievances and the powerful, enduring spirit of resistance within these communities, demonstrating their significant contribution to India's larger fight for freedom.
It's powerful to connect the challenges they faced with this history of fighting back. Given this context of historical struggles and ongoing socioeconomic issues, what does the study tell us about the framework of constitutional safeguards and government schemes established to support them today?
Well, in response to this history and the persistent challenges, both the central and state governments in India have established a fairly extensive framework of legal safeguards and welfare schemes.
What kind of constitutional protections are in place specifically for scheduled tribes?
The Indian Constitution includes several articles specifically aimed at protecting and promoting the interests of scheduled tribes. These cover areas like ensuring educational and economic advancement, Articles 15.4-46. There are provisions for reservations, that is, set-aside positions in public employment and promotions, Articles 16.4, 16.4a, 16.4b, 335. Protection against exploitation, like bonded labor and child labor, is enshrined in Articles 23 and 24.
Okay.
The Constitution also provides for the administration of areas with significant tribal populations, designated as scheduled areas under Article 244.1 and the Fifth Schedule, including provisions for grants and aid, Article 275, to help these areas. Political representation is ensured through reserved seats in the National Parliament, Lok Sabha Article 330, state legislative assemblies, Article 332, and at the local level in panchayats, Articles 243d, 243t. Cultural preservation is also mentioned, Article 350, and under the Fifth Schedule, tribal advisory councils, DTACs, are meant to advise governors on tribal welfare.
So there's a strong legal and constitutional foundation on paper. What about specific schemes and programs detailed in the study?
There are many. Key ones highlighted include the Tribal Subplan, TSP, now called the ST component, STC, which is a strategy to channel funds from various government ministries specifically towards tribal development. The study notes a significant budget increase for this in recent years, hitting 1.2 lakh crore in 2023-24.
That's a lot of money.
It is. There's also PMJ-NMEN, a program specifically targeted at the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, PDTGs, we discussed, focusing on improving basic infrastructure like roads, health services via mobile medical units, education facilities like Anganwadis and schools, electrification, and mobile connectivity in their remote habitats.
Right, targeted support.
Exactly. A crucial piece of legislation is the Forest Rights Act, FRA, of 2006. This act aims to recognize and vest forest rights, both individual rights for cultivation and habitation, and community rights for grazing, fishing, collecting minor forest produce, and habitat rights specifically for PVTGs with scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers. The Gram Sabha, the village assembly, which is the lowest level of local self-governance, is meant to play a key role in this process.
Gram Sabha empowerment, okay.
There's also the PISA Act of 1996, which extends panchayat local self-governance provisions to the scheduled areas, specifically empowering the Gram Sabhas in these areas with greater control over matters like minor forest produce, land, water resources, and monitoring migrant laborers. Madhya Pradesh has enacted its version of this law. For education, various scholarship schemes exist, pre-matric, post-matric, etc. The Eklavya Model Residential Schools, EMRS, aim to provide quality, holistic education specifically for tribal children, and many are functional in MP districts. There's also the Adivasi Shiksha Rin Yojana for educational loans. The MP Tribal Research Institute is working on multilingual education initiatives, documenting tribal languages like Bhil, Baigani, and Korku, and creating bilingual educational materials. Skill development programs also exist, often with support from bodies like NABARD.
Seems comprehensive on the education front.
And in healthcare, beyond PMJNMN's mobile units, national programs like the National Health Mission and Poshan Abhiyan are meant to be strengthened in tribal areas. An MP Innovation Hub collaborates to improve maternal and child health outcomes. Livelihood programs include TriFed, promoting tribal products through Tribes India outlets and events like Adi Mahotsav, and the Vanthan Vikas Karyakram, focused on harnessing forest wealth. The state also has a scheduled tribe relief scheme for immediate financial aid in case of destitution or loss. And backing all this is an institutional framework. The Central Ministry of Tribal Affairs, the State's Department of Tribal Affairs, the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, and bodies like the National Scheduled Tribes Finance and Development Corporation, which has an office in Bhopal.
It sounds like there's a significant effort towards cultural preservation, too, embedded in these institutions.
Yes, absolutely. Tribal Research Institutes, TRIs, are crucial here, playing a vital role in documenting tribal languages, art forms, and also evaluating the impact of schemes. The MPTRI has specifically documented several tribal languages and organized cultural festivals. The Tribal Research and Development Institute in Bhopal is noted as a premier body. The Adivasi Lokala Academy actively promotes tribal arts and manages the Adivart Museum. And the Sri Badavoy State Tribal Museum in Chinwara, one of the oldest and largest tribal museums in MP, provides a showcase for the culture of over 45 groups and also highlights the contributions of tribal freedom fighters.
So on paper, we have extensive constitutional protections, a multitude of schemes covering health, education, livelihoods, and culture, and a network of institutions. That sounds incredibly comprehensive, designed to address all the challenges we've discussed. But this brings us to a crucial point the study raises. If all these protections and programs exist, why are the outcomes on the ground still lagging so significantly?
This is the core tension the study points to. Despite this comprehensive framework, there are significant challenges in implementing these initiatives effectively, which explains why the tough socioeconomic conditions persist. Your source points to several critical gaps.
Okay, implementation gaps. Like what?
Well, one is simply ineffective utilization of funds. Budget allocations may increase, but the study notes problems with unspent funds and even resource diversion at the ground level, meaning the money intended for tribal development doesn't always reach the intended beneficiaries or purposes.
So money is allocated, but it's not translating into action.
Exactly. And the issue of displacement driven by development projects continues. Tribal communities are still being displaced from mining, industry, or infrastructure without adequate rehabilitation or compensation that truly secures their future.
Still happening despite protections.
Yes. The implementation of the Forest Rights Act is perhaps the most critical failure the study highlights in this section. With only about 50% of claims approved nationally and, remember, zero recognition of community forest resource rights, specifically in Madhya Pradesh, according to the source, the act isn't fully protecting tribal land rights. This lack of recognition is a major roadblock. The recent changes to forest conservation rules are also criticized in the study for potentially making this displacement easier.
That's a serious indictment of a key piece of protective legislation. What about the gaps in health and education we discussed earlier? Are those implementation failures too?
They stem directly from implementation failures. Primary health centers are still chronically underfunded, understaffed, and physically inaccessible in many remote areas. Access to quality health care remains inadequate. That pervasive mistrust between tribal communities and external service providers remains a significant barrier that policy hasn't effectively overcome. And poor sanitation, linked to waterborne diseases, persists due to implementation failures of related programs. For education, the gaps mirror the barriers we identified. Infrastructure is still lacking, qualified teachers are scarce, high dropout rates persist because curricula don't resonate with tribal life. Economic pressures forcing children to work haven't been fully addressed by livelihood schemes, and social issues like child marriage still limit attainment, particularly for girls, despite laws against it.
The same problems persist despite the programs.
Exactly. For livelihoods, schemes like MGN-RIGIA face issues in their delivery. Challenges in forming effective community cooperatives, like the source mentions with the Korku and Forest Department interactions, limit economic autonomy and prevent communities from truly benefiting from their resources.
Right.
And the PVTGs face these issues in the most compounded way. The implementation challenges are magnified by extreme physical remoteness, the continued reluctance of external service providers to work in these difficult areas, and that deep-seated mistrust. Development schemes often fail these groups precisely because they don't respect traditional knowledge, for instance, traditional healing practices, or adequately address their profound isolation. The study notes a fundamental conflict arises when external development goals clash with their cultural identity and traditional land use patterns, leading to displacement and a constant struggle for recognition. Their very identity can become overshadowed by the necessity of forced migration just to survive.
So what does all this mean when we pull it together? We've explored a community of significant size with a rich and diverse cultural heritage deeply tied to nature, essential to the state's environment, and holding historical importance through their fierce resistance. Yet, they face stark, interconnected socioeconomic challenges in health, education, and livelihoods under a legal and policy framework that, while extensive on paper, struggles profoundly with implementation on the ground.
That summarizes the complex picture perfectly. The core issue is undeniably bridging that vast gap between the intention of the policies and their actual reality for tribal people in Madhya Pradesh. The study you provided concludes with several detailed recommendations, aiming for sustainable development, cultural preservation, and genuinely improved outcomes. They strongly emphasize that the path forward requires a multi-pronged, integrated, and critically, a culturally sensitive approach.
For someone trying to understand the path forward based on this study, what are some of the key recommendations that stand out?
They highlight several crucial areas for action. First, strengthening local governance and fully implementing the PISA Act is seen as essential to genuinely empower the Gram Sabas, giving communities real control over their local resources and decision-making.
More power at the local level.
Precisely. Second, accelerating the recognition of land and forest rights under the Forest Rights Act is paramount. This means not only speeding up claim approvals, but also preventing land alienation and ensuring that any necessary displacement for projects involves proper compensation, rehabilitation, and crucially, free, prior, and informed consent from the communities involved.
Consent is key.
Absolutely. In education, the recommendation is to develop culturally relevant curricula that integrate tribal languages and traditional knowledge, directly address the economic barriers keeping children out of school, and specifically focus on improving female literacy. For healthcare, enhancing access is key, requiring better funded PHCs, increasing the reach of mobile units, leveraging telemedicine where possible, and conducting culturally sensitive awareness campaigns specifically designed to build trust with communities.
Building trust is essential there.
It really is. Fostering sustainable livelihoods means promoting tribal crafts and skills, significantly improving the implementation and reach of government schemes like MG and ROGA, and actively supporting community-led cooperatives so they can manage their resources and enter markets on their own terms.
Community-led initiatives.
Yes. For PVTGs, the recommendations call for targeted habitat-level interventions, meaning support designed for their specific environment and context to address their unique vulnerabilities in health, education, and livelihood in ways that respect their traditions and isolation.
Got it. Tailored support.
Actively preserving cultural heritage is also a key recommendation, emphasizing the role of TRIs in documenting languages and arts, encouraging knowledge transfer between generations, and promoting responsible tourism that benefits communities directly. And finally, there's a strong emphasis on enhancing the policy implementation itself through robust monitoring, evaluation, establishing clear accountability for failures, ensuring better coordination across government departments, and increasing transparency with active and genuine community participation at every stage.
This deep dive into the scheduled tribes of Madhya Pradesh, based on the comprehensive study you shared, has revealed a truly fascinating and complex picture. We've seen their demographic strength, their rich, distinct cultures, the severe socioeconomic hurdles they face, and the powerful history of resistance they carry.
And it's clear that while a legal and policy framework exists to support them, the gap between that intent and the reality on the ground is a critical area demanding focused attention. It underscores that programs alone aren't enough. Effective, culturally sensitive implementation with genuine community involvement is absolutely necessary.
It really makes you reflect on the inherent tension between what's often seen as necessary development or progress and the vital importance of preserving unique cultural identities and traditional ways of life, especially for communities like the PVTGs who are most vulnerable. How do you navigate that balance, ensuring progress doesn't come at the cost of identity and heritage?
It's a question that sits at the heart of development challenges globally, highlighting why simply imposing external models rarely works, and why listening to and empowering the communities themselves is really the only sustainable path forward.
Absolutely. A big thank you for bringing this comprehensive study to our attention and allowing us to take this deep dive today. We hope this conversation has given you a much clearer understanding of this important topic.
We certainly hope so. We look forward to taking another deep dive with you next time.
Until then, keep learning, keep exploring,